Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from www.englishwithkirsty.com. Here I'll be sharing with you tips, information and other learning resources so that you can improve your business English.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. And today we are continuing our series looking at different types of learning, so the different forms that learning can take. It's not all just about courses, there are other things we can do as well. And to help me to talk about this, I've brought back a guest who's been here a number of times. I think it's 4 now. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me for the, I think, third time. Is it 4?
I think it's,
I think it's
no, I
3.
think it's, I don't know, many.
You've been to my podcast, I've been to yours. I guess that's why we don't really know how many times it has been.
Let's start for anyone who doesn't know who you are then. Let's start with a quick introduction, but specifically what's your connection with language and languages?
Oh, brother.
Wow. I'm going to start with the easy questions and move on from there.
Okay, that's super easy because basically that's what I do and that's what I think about all day long. And it's been that way ever since I was a child. Not because I was part of one of those multilingual families or anything like that, but definitely that's one of the first things that called my attention was the need to speak English, and there were plenty of opportunities to learn it formally and informally, which I will talk about. But then I ended up going to college and doing my studies in linguistics. Where you don't necessarily study languages, but you study language in the French sense of langage, right? So it's English only has one word for what we in Latin languages have as langue and langage. So there's a difference. And so I have been working with languages also throughout all my professional life. So that's it. I live and breathe languages. That's what I do, I suppose.
Okay, maybe we should start with your name, because you didn't do that. Do you want to?
Okay, well, the name is there anyway. Zoom helps you like that. So it's in Portuguese, Rita Prazeres Gonçalves, and I'm Portuguese, obviously, from Portugal.
Okay, so talking about languages, which are your languages? So Portuguese, English, more?
Well, there's a very different type of relationship I have with each one of my 3 foreign languages, right? So definitely started with English, of course, but then French came into my life through school, and then I pursued studies outside of school because I was always very interested in lexicology, the part of linguistics that deals with words, and some of the most interesting theories actually come from French-speaking countries. So that was one of the reasons why I thought I should pursue that one. And then a bit later, because we didn't have that option at school, at university, I did Spanish. And that actually became my number 2 language because I use it quite a lot. I enjoy learning it, and I've used it in real life for many years. Then there's a little splash of, let's say, Russian, a little nothing of Hungarian in my past. Those through university, and I guess that's it. So it's not like I have a super great knowledge in number of languages. It's just I'm very, I guess, focused and interested in the ones I speak, and also in the whole phenomenon of language. In general, and not necessarily, I'm not one of those polyglots who learns languages all the time, but I still hope that I somehow have the time to maybe pursue some studies in German, because that would be one of my fantasy languages that I actually don't know. So I'd love to somehow go to that or try that again, because I am an actual A1 level student at the moment. So that's where I am. So that's it. So not a huge variety, but a great passion from a broader or a more philosophical point of view.
Oh, we look forward to welcoming you to the German networking when your level is a bit more
Oh
advanced
yeah,
and you can come
almost
and
there,
join
almost
us.
there.
Tell us what you do, introduce us and to your work, and I don't know, but it'd be good to I think it's
Okay.
it's one of my languages and it's so I'm going to promote learning German, but I think it's interesting how you talk about that because each language has you have a different relationship with each one. They're like people in a way, your experience is different, the people that you meet through the language are different, maybe the resources that you work with are different, the reasons for learning them are different, and everyone is its own unique experience. And that's why I can relate to this idea. Like for me, I have 3 additional languages at different stages, but I don't want more. I don't want 50, I don't want 10. I want to be really proficient and at using the ones I have and to get to know them really well, I guess, rather than to have many and just know how to order a coffee or something.
Hmm.
So that makes
I guess
sense.
it's also the opportunity to mature your knowledge of the language, of the varieties of that language, sometimes of the dialects of those languages, and the whole cultural phenomenon around them that you can dive into if you're that interested, right? Because obviously it's not just a matter of knowing the language. If you're passionate about it, usually you go deeper and you try to figure out and learn and as much as possible about all aspects of that culture that gave birth, let's say, somehow to that language that you're passionate about. So, of course, there's a lot to it. And as you go deeper and deeper, you also have the chance to, because you've done your basics, let's say, you can go into more specific aspects like slang that people have the impression that they can figure out in the early years, but that's not the case. Obviously, it's one of the hardest things to learn. Or you can try to figure out a little bit of the history of the language and how things came about, the relationship between languages that have very strong connections, like, for example, French and English. So I guess it you don't necessarily, in our cases, need to keep on adding languages to your pool of language, but you just simply go deeper into the languages that you know, and then you get to know the ins and outs, or as much as possible, everything that comes with that language in all possible aspects. And that is also how they come out of their shell and the way they are seen by other cultures, other languages, the impact that they have in other countries. So all of this is very interesting to me, especially when we talk about English, obviously.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really exciting things that happens once you progress past that initial level is that you can start enjoying content that's not made for language learners. And whilst I
Mhm.
appreciate the people who, go to the trouble of making podcasts of people who are learning languages, that's really good. But for me as a learner, as soon as I can get past that and I can get to the point where I'm consuming content that is made for speakers of that language, that's where the real fun begins for me because I can start to understand more and really appreciate how the language is being used. And that's something
Mhm.
that I spend time doing because I think it's the way that you learn. It's how you can really build your vocabulary, whatever that means for you, whether it's podcasts or music or films or books or whatever it is, you can really begin to get to know that language better. So our topic today is about music. So maybe we can come on to talking a bit more about your story and why music is important to you or how it helped you in terms of, well, did learning English help you to understand the music or did the music help you to understand English? I'm not really sure which way you would see that, but
Let's
why
say it
is
was
music
a
relevant?
it was a codependent kind of relationship, I guess. It was probably the most important aspect in my learning journey because I was I well relatively well, this is not well said, relatively young, yes, when this came into my life. So at 10, I became a huge Madonna fan. And obviously, I still had a year or so before I would start learning English at school. And so basically, I started listening to the music, but of course, still I couldn't understand anything. And but the accent and the sound and the cadence and all of it, it made a lot of sense to me. So I feel like when I went to school, I felt like it was Christmas for me because I had someone there who knew how to speak English, because no one around me knew how to speak English, and that person, my teacher, was going to be able to actually help me get started with finally understanding what was going on with music. And so that's what happened. So
Did your
it
teacher
came
know
at
what
the
was going to
same
happen to
time.
them? Like, did they realize they had this child who really wanted to learn, but more obscure things, not like, I have a dog, I have a cat, but like more complicated stuff? Were they willing to help?
Yes, I can remember Professora Julia. Thank you so much. She was actually very nice. All my teachers throughout my life were very nice in helping me with developing the skills that I needed to at least understand Madonna's lyrics in the beginning, because I would come to school with the papers with the lyrics written and then try as much as possible to learn a word at a time, things like that. So that was the very beginning as I was learning my verbs to be, right? And to have. I was already trying to get ahead a little bit so that I could sing along and somehow start understanding a few of the words that were in the lyrics. So yeah, everybody was always very open to that. I think English teachers or language teachers love languages, so they love it when you ask questions, right? And so it was a really cool moment and a great synergy for me. I remember the last time I went to a teacher to ask for help with lyrics was when I was already in my second year in college. So this was a practice that I had throughout my school years, and all my teachers helped and pitched in. So I cannot complain.
It's really good, but where did you get them? Because nowadays, if I find a song I like, I can just go and find the words online. But where were these words available?
Wow, that's very specific, but there were two ways of having the lyrics
Well, we're
back
about the
then.
same age. It's not like when I was just thinking about, how much
No,
easier
just
that has
I
become, but that shows
someone
your
I guess nobody
dedication.
ever asked me that. But
Ah,
anyway,
I
so
like to be
you could
different.
find them in two different ways in Portugal specifically. So both you had the actual album or the cassette version, and the album would bring the lyrics, right? All the words would be written down for
Mm.
every song. Or you would have this German magazine called Bravo. We only had access to the German version. And then every week, a song or two would be featured with a picture of the artist and then the lyrics both in English and in German. So that's how basically I would go to school with that magazine in my hand to ask
And hope that
my
they would be
teachers.
featuring the the songs that you wanted to learn
Yes, of
about.
course, of course. But usually, well, by the time I was, I guess, 11, when I started learning English, I already had all albums that were out at that time. So I actually had access to the lyrics also from the album covers.
Okay, well, we have no script here. We have no, you don't know what the questions are going to be, so I'm glad to be a bit more
Yes.
unusual. So, so that, how did that develop then? So you were listening, you were a child, you were listening to this music, you enjoyed the music. Did it lead to anything else? Any other activities relating to music or concerts, or like where did it go from there? This curious child who wanted to understand the lyrics.
Well, it was all around that, basically all day when I was at home and not at school, which I thoroughly enjoyed being at school in all aspects. But the truth is that when I was at home, I would dedicate a lot of hours to the whole listening to music in English. Well, of course, the big focus was Madonna, but other things too that were around already. The Elton Johns and Michael Jacksons of life, but definitely her music was the one I was focusing on, and those were the cassettes I was playing myself, and then I was repeating the same songs many, 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 many times every day.
I'm
So I was
sure your
getting used to
family
them.
loved this. They all knew the
And
songs as well.
neighbors and neighbors. So I was very famous. My streets were playing music every single day for many hours and always the same singer. So yes, everybody who lived close to me knew that addiction, right?
You shared it with the world. Okay.
Yes.
But
So
was
my,
it
my
just
brother was also he was 4 or so at the time, and so we just basically got together to go on a journey to learn as much English as possible with all possible methods we could come up with. We would have like quizzes, or I say a word and you have to say the lyrics where the word is featured, or we would later create some crossword games for each other or things like that. So we've always, or fill in the gaps, we would we would do fill in the gaps with Madonna songs. So we developed a bunch of exercises for each other and ways of using it to also spend our time together. So that was a really great opportunity for, I guess, the both of us. So by the time he was 8, he could actually speak English independently. So the first time we went out of the country, he was my mom's interpreter. So that's what he could do when I was 8, because we actually went on this journey together.
That's very cool that you had someone to accompany you on that journey, like you were doing things together as brother and sister, but also that you were doing things that we now as language teachers would create for our students. Perhaps you were creating them for each other as children with no one to show you how to do that, or you just took the initiative and did it.
Yeah.
And how about singing? Were you just listening or were you singing as well?
Well, you wished. Of course, I was singing. That was the whole point. The point was that I would do something like I'm doing now, right, with the headphones and the microphone. So I had all of that gear already, and the idea was to get my accent and the way of pronouncing the words as close as possible to Madonna's, obviously. So that's also why when I had any doubts about, if you say either or either, whatever, I would just follow whatever she used, and that made it easier. Actually, that's something I always say to people. I know it's a bit difficult to follow someone in such a way, but I would say that at least in my opinion, especially in the early years, it's very, very beneficial to actually have a person who is a native speaker, who has a lot of material out. These days, it's becoming easier and easier to have that. Back then, it was not so easy, but still, Madonna was a very specific example, because we had the songs, we had live concerts, we had some movies, not talking about the quality of those movies, but they were useful to me. So usually following someone's, let's say, norm is, if you don't have ideas of your own, you don't have your own intuition developed enough, is actually, in my opinion, a good methodology to actually somehow set some inner rules that you will then get rid of or not eventually, when you can be more independent in your thinking in the language that you're learning. So yeah, that's what I think.
I've thought of that for writing in the past, somebody who writes nicely, who writes clearly, who writes well, but it works for speaking as well. If you find somebody that you enjoy listening to, you find easy to understand because they speak clearly, and then that that they are speaking well, that you're not going to learn a bunch of really bad habits from them, but that can also be beneficial. So we've got vocabulary, we've got pronunciation, we've got I guess language in context, because a lot of when I think back at some of the things that I learned at school, I enjoyed being at school, but some of this, I'm never going to give people directions to the post office because I don't do it in English. But we have Google Maps. I don't get involved there because my sense of direction is terrible. So there are things that I learned that I will never need, but I think when you're learning through something that is real, whether that's a song or a movie, then it's something that makes sense in a day-to-day life and situation, and therefore it's more kind of believable, and therefore it's content that's more likely to be useful.
Speaking about context, I also used, and I'll say which series in particular, which 2 series in particular. There were 2 that were more important. Like I say, I like, or 3 maybe, but one of them definitely the top. So with the same methodology that we used for Madonna's lyrics, we also used in English Family Ties, I think, with Michael J. Fox. And so that was the series that we watched and recorded, because then we got a VCR in 1989, 88. And so that made everything easier, because we could watch videos over and over and over. And so we would record episodes on Saturday and then go through them in 5-minute installments, right? So that you could learn all of them. I know we had nothing else to do, really. We were not into sports or anything like that. So we were both at home listening to music and singing a lot, practicing a lot, and just focusing on this, not because we had to, but that's because of what we wanted to do. So definitely those two things, music and series, for me, more than movies, were very, very important. And there was a lot of series about teenagers, Beverly Hills, Saved by the Bell. All those things are usually dedicated to teenagers, and you can learn a lot about the vocabulary that actually is kind of age appropriate. So I thought it was really interesting. I still remember some of the sentences, some of the verbs I learned there, and I still have that context in my mind, both the images and the sentences, in order to go back there to give people examples all the time. So for me, the combination of all this was what made my English, I guess, more real, more alive, I suppose. My English is, I think, very, very practical. I use it on a daily basis, as you know, and I really enjoy speaking it. And I would love to make it better every single day. And I try to somehow keep it up. So I still watch movies with a lot of attention. I still do some transcriptions, which is like my practical. You asked me to give like a practical tip, and one of my practical tips for learning any language is transcription. I know there's all sorts of softwares. I know you can have subtitles in your videos, whatever, right? But the truth is that you learn so much from transcription. I'm not saying in the early days, but definitely when you already have some idea of the grammar and the structure, sentence structure. So it's very beneficial because you do a lot of things at the same time. So it's listening comprehension, it's some spelling, is the actual grammar, is words in context, is verbs in the correct tenses. So I mean, you have lots of things to work with if you actually decide to transcribe, for example, a 5-minute video of a series or a movie, for example. So it's one of the things I used to do all the time, and I advise everyone to do, and all my students have to do, because I find it one of the most interesting ways of actually stopping and focusing on whatever 5 minutes of content you're studying, because you're forced, or else how can you write it down, right? So for me, it's one of those exercises that brings you lots, and you can use the exercise of doing the transcription itself, and then you can use that material for doing, verb study, vocabulary study, pronunciation study. All of these things are possible. I know the word study sounds a little bit boring, but I think it's actually a lot of fun, because this is something that you would pay attention to. Usually it's content that you enjoy. It can be a podcast, can be something like that. So all of these things that you have available to you on YouTube can also work as songs worked for me, because now you have content from every language at your fingertips, right? So that was one of the things that I did the most, was to transcribe Madonna songs. So maybe when I was still, let's say 15 or 16, I would still transcribe if she had a new song. So I kept that practice for long years, and I still do it if I have to. So yeah, I think there's a lot of benefits in exercises like that, where you're actually interacting with all aspects of the language at the same time.
I think it's good for you as well. It's another part of your, there's one thing just reading something, but if you're actually writing it down, it's sometimes those words they're committed to memory in a different way. I know that I have to write things down if I want to learn them. And so I can see that the transcription would work. I haven't actually done any on my own recently, but I know I've had it in when I was going to Romanian classes, we had to do it. And I think as well, I guess it's not really relevant for you as an English learner, but if you are learning a language where there's a different keyboard as well, it can really help with your speed for typing on that keyboard. I know that helps me as well if I'm doing that.
Good point. But of course, I did use a keyboard. I tell everyone to do everything by hand, which doesn't apply, obviously. But yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's lots of advantages. You can do that too. I like that exercise. So that's another twist to my transcription exercise, is that you actually, instead of doing it with your handwriting, that you actually type it. So another plus.
Yeah, you can keep up a bit better, but you can also learn to type in the language that you're learning. How
Yeah.
about shadowing? Is that something that you used to do or do? So like where you repeat what the person is saying to, so you're not thinking about the content, but you're thinking about how you deliver that, how you pronounce the words. Like you
I
kind of
guess
are doing it with
when
singing,
singing,
but with series or podcasts.
yes, of course, I say that every time I spend a few hours without speaking English. So today is the first time I'm speaking English, actually.
Oh, lovely.
And what I do usually is to go back to my complicated sentence. I say that my sentence, I always say this sentence because it gets me into the English mood, because it's something you can actually not transfer into the Portuguese culture. And that is the first sentence that Madonna says when she is for the first time doing her first tour, right? So she performs in Detroit, her hometown, and then says that she says, "I was never elected a homecoming queen or anything, but I sure feel like one now." So it's actually, I think, very hard to say this sentence, and it doesn't relate to anything that is actually part of my Portuguese world. So I always
Nor
use it
mine.
to get into the
Yes,
to the
as an English
English
person.
mood, right? So I know a lot of things by heart, and one of the things I also do with songs, I still do it, believe it or not. Um, Two things actually. One is I ask the song questions, right? I do this all the time. It's pretty annoying if you're with me. But since I know what the lyrics are, I usually ask questions. So that's how I practice my questions. And
How do you
the
ask
other,
questions?
yeah,
Like, what's an example? How does that work practically?
like I could say something like, "What is life?" Right? And then she'll say, "Life is a mystery." Right?
Okay,
Something like
yeah.
that. So just a quick example for like a prayer. But one of the things that I do, and it's really hard to do, so if you want to try this at home, you can. It's hard, but it's not dangerous, is actually to sing a song without singing it as a song. So instead of going, "Life is a mystery," you say, "Life is a mystery. Everyone must stand alone. I hear you call my name, and it feels like home." So it's a whole different way of relating to the song,
Like a
is
poem.
actually to
Okay.
say it as a poem or as a text or something like that. So you just quit the musical part and you just use the lyrics to actually learn the text, right? And not use it as a song. So that's also one of the things that I do.
If you know it really well, I guess it's really hard to do that because you want to start singing and you
Well,
can't because you're supposed to be
exactly.
reciting.
So those
Okay.
exercises, believe it or not, I still do it. I still do it. So that's how juvenile I am.
But
So
no, you found
I
something that
st-
works for you, and I think that's important as well for any language learner learning any language or improving any language. Find what works for you and do more
of
of that
course,
because yeah, there are some things we have to do because they're harder and we don't like them. But if we want to have all our skills at the same level, but if you find something that works for you, then why not keep using that to improve?
because it's like a language, you never know a language. You don't know your own language, right? So let alone being pretentious enough to think that you're going to master a foreign language, right? So in my opinion, and what I always say to everyone is that you're not perfect when you speak your language. Do not think that you
Mm.
cannot make mistakes when you're learning a language, because you're making mistakes in your own language anyway, and you
I
still
sometimes
speak
find
it
them when I
and you
record.
feel confident.
Yeah, when I check my because I do my own editing but I don't really edit a lot to be honest for the podcast, but I do check it to make sure everything was recorded properly and sometimes I notice things that I said, like, come on, you're an English teacher. Why did you say that? But it's true. When we are
Yeah.
speaking, we're not really thinking. I don't mean
Mm.
like really terrible things, but when we're thinking as at the same time as we're speaking, we do make mistakes sometimes. And that's why I don't like to see, I want to speak perfect English because what is perfect English? It doesn't exist.
Now I
Um,
say I want to speak as much English as possible. This is my goal.
hmm. And that's liberating because like if
Yeah.
we're aiming for perfection and perfection doesn't exist, then progress is better. Like to be better than you were yesterday is an achievement. And
Yeah. For
that's
me, it's just a joy. For example, for learning a new word, if it happens, it's like, oh, this is an amazing day because I learned a word. And some words I actually know under what circumstances I learned them and what I was doing or what happened, or, so I like that. I like keeping that very, very, very personal approach which is just, living life and having English in the middle of it. That's been my case, obviously, because of course I lived in an English speaking country for 6 years. People think that's where I learned how to speak English. I've heard this a lot. People, oh, you speak English because you lived in the States. I specifically lived in California, most of the time in Los Angeles. And I can tell you that I spoke probably a lot more Spanish than I spoke English. So that's one of those misconceptions that sometimes people have about my English progress, right? Or my progress with English. But the truth is that I learned everything that I know basically before I actually lived in an English speaking country. So sometimes that relationship is also not as obvious as we might think. I actually lived in Spain and spoke English all the time, lived in the States and spoke Spanish all the time. So that's what's so funny.
That doesn't surprise me because we're talking about you. So, that's I can imagine.
Because I was working in an American company when I lived in Barcelona. And everybody was speaking English because there were people from everywhere. And also here in Portugal, when I worked in companies' offices, we did a lot of the meetings that we had to be in English. So it was a daily thing. But when I was in the States, it was not that obvious, right? So I would go sometimes days without speaking English because, many, many reasons. But I knew and worked with a lot of Brazilian people, a lot of Mexican people, which is normal, obviously. So it was like that, right? So basically, maybe I learned, or I think the thing that had the most impact in terms of learning when I got there was actually food. I think food is the hardest, and I can say this, at least for me, the hardest thing to learn in a language, because it's not just learning names of fruits and vegetables and all that stuff, is actually understanding what they mean. And I was very shocked when I went to a bowling alley right when I got there, and because it was my birthday, and I had to eat, the idea was to eat hot dogs because that's what they had. And it was so complicated because it was a full menu of hot dogs. I had no idea you could have this many types. And either you could identify them by the name of the Chicago dog or whatever, New York dog, whatever, or to actually understand what the ingredients were was very, very hard. So it was probably the hardest thing I had to learn was actually names or actually food related vocabulary and talk, right?
But
It's not
that's
only
really
vocabulary.
to do with the culture, isn't it? Because if I went there, I wouldn't know either. Like,
Yeah, of
we
course,
don't have
of
those
course.
here. So I speak, English is my first language, but I would still have the same problem because it's learning
Yeah.
what that means there and
And
what
maybe the
everybody
same
else.
thing doesn't even have the same name, right? Because the zucchinis and the aubergines and whatever. So all of those things
Yeah, it's
seem to have different names depending on, what the country or sometimes the city or the state is. So, so I always had music as the thing to go back to in order to get my English in check. There are other artists that I also enjoy listening to, and their English is a lot more elaborate, so they're not pop singers. Like Lorena McKenneth, for example, she, for example, turns a lot of Shakespeare's poems into songs. So
okay.
now I am, starting to be brave enough to actually go into other types of artists that have, a lot of references. One of the things that is very interesting, I think, and that I've learned from music too, is that you learn names of international references, people like Plato, or, mythical figures, or names of philosophers, names of celebrities. It's because it's different in every language. So music with a lot of references also teaches you a lot of that, names of places, names of people that you probably are not aware of. So it's like forever I will be in this world of wonder of finding out more and more and more and more about English just by sticking with English, right?
Yeah, it never
Because
ends.
there's
Like even with
so
your first
much
language,
to
it never
do.
ends. But with any other
Yeah.
language, like, if you want to go deeper. But I think like some people that haven't done this before, okay, if they have an artist that they really enjoy, then obviously they're going to want to listen to that person's music because they like it. But if people are looking for ways to use more music in their language learning, take it for English to make it easier. What advice would you give them? Like, what makes some music better to be used in this way than other things? What are some things to avoid? What should you look out for when you're trying to use music to choose the tracks that you want to use for learning a language?
So one of the most important things, I think the most important thing is to find out somehow if the grammar is correct. So this is also why you need, especially these days, the assistance of other people, of even, I suppose, AI. You can ask AI or whatever. Not that I've done it, but I suppose you have a lot of ways of knowing if this song is correct from a grammatical point of view. However, if it's correct, but it's more poetic, or if it's half sentences, or if it's correct, but you still have to imagine a lot of the meaning, then it will be a lot harder because you have to extrapolate from the content. So this is why I say that for any language, I suppose, pop music, so songs that are very well known, are usually in a country or in a culture or language, they're usually your best bet for beginners, right? So songs that everybody knows usually are the best songs, unless they're like about nasty words, or if they're not so polite or something like that. But other than that, usually if they're songs that people can actually sing easily, so all of these things have to somehow be in place. So running away from hip hop genres like that, or devotional music where you have to have a lot of references in order to understand what is going on. So songs that are simple enough, but grammatically good enough for you to actually take full sentences if possible. And when I started learning English, I started with Madonna's True Blue album. Okay, so that's what happened.
Because you had it, or because you chose it?
It
That's
was
what you were
the
given.
last one that had been out at that time, and
Okay.
I was lucky like that. So most of the songs have these features, right? She's basically telling a story. There's a lot of irregular verbs in the past tense, for example. So all of these things are something that you should somehow try to find out before you launch into, attaching yourself to that song or that artist. And obviously some artists, most of their career, I would say, even the Taylor Swifts, the Ed Sheerans, to be a little bit more contemporary, right? I'd say Lady Gaga, Britney Spears. I mean, these artists tend to have songs that have full sentences, or that have consistent vocabulary, use a lot of verbs that are common sense, right? So try not to go for something that is very elaborate, very cultural, right?
It's like a story, isn't it? Most of the ones that you're talking about are telling a story of something that happened.
Yeah, exactly. They're very narrative. And that would be the easiest way of doing it, because also there's a variety of verb tenses. There's a small variety of vocabulary. They usually don't go into, crazy words in pop songs, right? So
Long
usually if they're
descriptions of how something was and how it looked. I mean, it's more about actions and things that happened, and also, I guess, not too fast, so that you can.
And it's also, there's a concept, right? There's a general concept that if you can grasp, then also if you can watch the video of that song, for example, that doesn't necessarily always help, but it can help you a lot. The visuals can help you a lot. If you see that artists live, for example, and also take advantage of the way that they talk to their public. So that's not music necessarily, but it's within a music context. And there's all sorts of, if you like musicals, maybe that's another way of doing it, because usually that they have subtitles in your language. So because I'm going to say this, and I say this every day, in my opinion, right? This is my opinion.
It's going to be controversial.
I have no idea. Having subtitles. So a lot of people tell me, well, I practice my English by watching movies or series or whatever without subtitles. I say that is probably not as relevant as people think as a good method for learning English or language, because actually subtitles will help you a lot. We all know, as we know, because we work in languages, that subtitles have to be manipulated according to all sorts of all sorts of features to fit the space, the number of characters, all of these things. But apart from all this, the subtitle will give you a lot of the information that is actually said, right? The goal is for you to understand exactly what they're saying. Sometimes it's conceptual, but the vast majority of times, especially if you go into the romantic comedies or series for teenagers, usually things are pretty literal or straightforward, right? So it's not like you have to, if you go to a movie that's very specific in medicine or the police or courts, then it's very technical and you don't learn as much because you spend all your time thinking about all that strange terminology and you don't have the space, mental space to focus on your vocabulary, your regular vocabulary, and your verbs especially, right? And the way that they build the sentences. But subtitles can actually help you a lot because there will be always that odd word that you don't know. And of course, the subtitler, trust me, they did their research and they will come up with the best possible option that they possibly could for that word or expression, right? So subtitles, in my opinion, they actually help you. If you want to watch without subtitles, then do the transcription, right? Yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about many things in life. It's about balance because for me, subtitles haven't been something that have been available to me and I had to do it without them. So I can't really say whether it would have helped me or not because I don't know. I can't read them. But I think where it becomes a problem is where people over rely on them and don't listen. So
Well, but that's a choice, right? But having them
choice and
there
it's something
is
that
actually
people,
great.
I think it's good. I think it's good to do both, actually. I think it's good to have them
They're
available
two
as a
different
tool.
exercises, really. If you focus on 5 minutes with the subtitles on, you will focus on certain things because it's, you know, the meaning is laid out for you in some of the words and some of the relevant linguistic affairs that happened over there, and then the images will help you too. But you can do the other exercise as like you have nothing there and you have to pay attention from the listening perspective so that you can benefit from that part of that whatever piece of audio or visuals.
Yeah,
Right. So
because
they're
conversations
completely
don't have
different
subtitles, so
exercises.
you need to have both skills if you want if you don't want to talk to anyone, it's fine. But if you want to
Yeah,
talk to
but I
people,
don't know
you
if this is your experience, but if you listen to a bunch of people who have learned foreign languages or they are learning, one of the things they'll say, they will brag about watching something without subtitles on. I think it's really funny because there's a lot that you can learn from subtitles. And thank God there were subtitles, or else I couldn't have learned most of the things that I did because there was nobody to tell me all the time at home what things were. And of course, I had dictionaries and all that stuff. So I bought my first 4 dictionaries when I was 10. And so I still have them and still use them. Very happy with dictionaries. With your fingers and your hands. Love the object. So it's one of my big interests is dictionaries, obviously. But all of this could not have helped me as much if I didn't have subtitles available at all times. So this is a feature of the Portuguese broadcasting stations, right? I know it's not like this everywhere, but these days you can actually get them on and off. I suppose that's what I did in Spain. I watched a lot of the materials with I call them materials because for me, if they're in a foreign language, I'm always paying attention to that. Even if I don't fully understand the language, I cannot help it. I'm just looking at subtitles and listening to things at all times. Sometimes I forget about what I'm watching and I just focus on that. So I guess
yeah, and I mean I have a lot of friends who work in this area and I know that they do a good job and I know that a lot of people have learned a lot through them. I just think the danger comes when you only do that. It's like anything. If you only listen to music, you're not gonna learn about conversation necessarily. But I think it's good to remember that as language learners, we have many tools available to us, and we should try not to only focus on the things that we enjoy the most, because there are other skills too, like speaking. What do you do with all this? I'm kind of getting to that point where you can absorb a lot of information, but unless you actually start using it actively, then it's going to remain passive knowledge. So it's looking at the tools that you have and trying to bring some variety too, because I think that we can get a bit stuck, especially for intermediate learners maybe who have been doing something similar for a while, and it's good to change things up a bit or to find a new artist or find a if you usually watch series, watch a movie, or if you, I don't know, see what your friends are watching, or do something a bit different, because otherwise, life
But
isn't so
I'll also
interesting when you.
say that I am by no means a self-taught person in any language or anything that I know. I will say this because that's also certain people think somehow that I've learned things by myself, which is definitely not the case. Definitely not the case, especially in terms of language. I did training for all my languages. I did extra courses outside school. I did anything that I could. So I do think that having that group of people, your teachers in at school and outside of school, if you can, is also something that you cannot. I mean, I cannot live without. So I'm not that kind of learner that by myself would be able to. So all these things that I'm talking about, it's not like I did them and therefore I didn't have the support of a teacher, a professor, etc. So I've always had that from the time I was 11 to the time I was, I don't know, for with some breaks in between because of the school system, but definitely until I was probably 20. So that was always going on, and that's the same for all of my languages. So it's not like I'm self-taught in any possible way. It's just that I was interested enough to keep on doing it outside the context of classes, classrooms, courses, and all. I did summer courses. I did anything I could, right? Anything money, our money could afford.
And
So that's
anything
what
that
we
you
did.
you do is going to help. I mean, if you, unless you're learning for purely academic reasons to understand how a language works, the reason we learn languages partly is to communicate, or to be able to communicate with other people. So whether that's a teacher, a course, friends, make friends who speak the language that you're learning, find other people. I don't tend to find other learners, to be honest. I've always been a bit like that. I'm not sure why, but at least find friends, find people who use the language so you can observe them. Like, all different people using the language will give you a better idea of how to construct sentences, because you can see you're not just, it's good to focus on one at the beginning, but then to see the whole variety that there is in ways of that people express themselves. So it
And don't
doesn't
be
mean.
shy. Tell your
Mhm.
friends to correct you, like I tell Kirsty to do it all the time, right? And she does, fortunately. Right. So last time, for you to see how basic things sometimes get overlooked, the expression was barking. I thought at the wrong tree, and then Kirsty said, "Oh no, it's barking up the wrong tree." Right.
Yeah, you're after that
So
squirrel.
that's how it goes, right? So you just maybe I knew it before and I forgot about it. I don't think so, but maybe I already learned it in the wrong way because it was probably just with sound, and I actually never grasped the full sentence. And so this happened like 2 days ago or so, and then Kirsty was like, "Well, barking up," and I'm like, "What?" So this is the very last thing I've learned in terms of English. And also, we exchanged a lot of thoughts about the differences between American English and British English. Of course, at school, we do learn something like British English, and basically, all my training at school and the school-oriented training was all in British English because that's what we have in our system. But I definitely only focus and have always focused on American English, and that all obviously also came from my early years. And because I do think that you have to know one norm somehow, or you have to focus on one, or else it would be just a big blob, a mixture of things, and it gets to a point where it doesn't necessarily make sense. So I do my best to keep on track with my American English as much as I can. So I don't know if this is everybody's opinion. Of course, I love watching shows and talking to people in any variety of English, especially if they're native speakers. But the truth is that I focus on that and I try to keep it somehow alive within my life more towards the American version of it. So, but there's a healthy exchange, I think, also with people who speak other varieties, and it's very enriching at the same time. But that is good to do when you already are at a certain stage and somehow the language is kind of already in your system, let's say that, right?
Yeah, because I
I
think
think
you need to be able to differentiate. It's one thing to know, oh, this is British English, this is American English, but it's good to establish what you want to speak, or what you, especially at the beginning, I think it's good to choose
yeah.
one. That's why I'm quite careful what I listen to, what I consume. That's why I mainly listen to Portuguese from Portugal, apart from the fact that I find it easier to understand now because I have to focus a lot more because I'm not used to, like, if something, somebody's speaking in a meeting, I'm there, I'm listening, but it takes more effort on my part. But I did that on purpose because it's about choosing, like, if you use an expression intentionally and that isn't the type of a language that you normally speak, that's intentional. But if you do it because you didn't know, that just creates a confusion, like if you mixed in some British English into an American, it sounds like either are you making a joke or are you what you do. But it's important to be intentional. I think if there are different varieties of a language available, then especially at the beginning, it's good to be very mindful with what you're consuming and to focus on one, and then to choose moving forwards what you want to speak. And then
it also has to do with your relationship with the language that you speak. So what's the origin of your interest, right? Is it purely professional in that case? So do you work in the UK, or are you going to work in the UK, or are you going to immigrate to the United States, or what's the story? So there's got to be something that will guide your choices. For me, it was a pretty obvious one because the person was American, right? But still, I've always been very, very focused on American culture. I enjoy American culture and politics and all of that. So I could get a lot of that information, and it's about the States and in American English, right? So as much as possible. So I focus on it also because at this stage of my life, I also identify a lot more with the language, the linguistic aspect of it, right? Yeah, so that's the way I approach it. It has to be what makes sense to me that guides my choices. So it's a very personal thing. In my professional life, there would have been no major difference if British English was my focus, right? Probably the consequence would be the same. But it's just that from a cultural point of view, from all sorts of historical reasons in my life, it ends up making more sense to actually keep going with my American English. I have been learning a lot about English in general and British English. That's the thing. If you have the chance to talk to a native speaker, you end up learning lots of things, even if it's not your chosen variety, right? But it's really good for you to practice for all that. I know Kirsty holds all sorts of events for people to have the chance to practice their English in her classes and all of that. So everything, I think, from what I see from here, she does is having in mind that people need this interaction, and also people need to find themselves within a language and a style and references and all of that to make their decisions, right? And it's true that we do not have many opportunities of speaking a foreign language when we are learning it. It has to be almost for exterior reasons of your life that you get the chance to practice or not, right? So in my case, it's always been a fact that I had to use English for work. So I was very lucky in that sense. But there's a lot of people who learned more years than I did, and then in the end, they didn't use it as much, and they ended up somehow losing that connection or that brain agility or that intuition to actually keep going. And now they feel like they're, like people say, rusty, right? So they have trouble going back to it.
And it's two different skills. If you're working with English every day because you're reading it or you're translating from it, and you're familiar with English, you understand. It's not the same as speaking, being spontaneous, and it's a different skill.
It's always been present at work from a speaking point of view, not talking about necessarily
for you, yeah, but
language
for
work,
other
right?
people.
So everything that I do usually there's a lot of English to it. But it's true. So some people in the language business domain, and Kirsty knows a lot about that, also have this issue that they don't have the chance to practice the spoken version of the language that they work with, because there's not necessarily always a lot of opportunities. And this is why I think that music and movies and all of that, also I always say this everywhere, if you get headphones and a microphone and get some content going.
I still haven't done that. I keep meaning to.
In your YouTube or whatever, and then you try to somehow go after the pronunciation of the person speaking. That's why if you choose one person, I think it's much easier. That's what I've always done my whole life. So I do sing to myself. I'm sorry, I'm like that.
And
But this is what I do.
your other tip that, with me about what was it? Find songs that you can sing. So like you're the right range for you, that the songs that you're going to be able to
Yes,
sing.
exactly. So, for example, I really enjoy Lorena McKennitt and let's say Tori Amos, right? However, the range of their voices is obviously, way beyond my possibilities. So finding something, yeah, that's right. Finding a singer, if we're talking about music, that has a range of voice that can somehow, right, be closer to yours. So you know if it's a higher voice or a lower voice. So my voice is in the middle lower kind of range. So for some singers, it would be impossible for me to sing along, and that would make me very frustrated because I need that on a regular basis, and I have to do it basically every day. That's why I drive and listen to music by myself all the time, because I need to do that exercise. That's very, very important for my mental health, trust me, to sing out loud. So finding artists that are somehow in your approximate range will also make it very, very well, much easier. Because if you like the Mariah Careys of life and you cannot find a way of surpassing the problems that she will bring to you in terms of the high pitch, then it's a huge problem. But then you can find your ways if you try hard enough, I'm sure. But usually, if you find an artist that you can actually somehow, it's just for yourself, right? But it's true that it makes it a lot easier. So
And
I
more
try
rewarding.
also my
Yeah.
best to fit my voice into somehow Madonna's voice, even if her voice is a little bit higher than mine. And therefore, sometimes I cannot get there. And so the other thing you can do, just as a stupid extra tip, is actually if they have a chorus, you can actually follow, because it would be in a different range. You can actually follow the chorus. So that's what I do. If I cannot reach the range, I usually go for the voice in the chorus if I can. So that's another thing you can do, and we will sing like that. It almost
Okay.
feels like you're singing with the singer. So there's a lot of techniques that you develop by listening to yourself, connecting to your voice. So all of this, like I always say, learning a language is one of the greatest development tools that you can have in life. Exactly, because you need to deal with yourself so much. You need to get rid of the fear, or at least you need to somehow try to tame it down. The fear of speaking with knowing that you're going to make mistakes, right? At every stage. So how many mistakes have I made today already? Like loads. Probably more than usual, because I'm very nervous.
You're
But
very nervous.
there's listening to yourself, recording yourself, comparing yourself to other voices of native speakers. So all of these exercises will help you a lot, and at the same time will help you connect with yourself and with your voice in that language, because we also talk about this all the time, Kirsty and I. We are different, slightly different people in different languages. Sometimes a language goes a lot more with your more standard personality. Sometimes you almost become someone else to speak that language. I feel like I speak differently in English, in Spanish, and in Portuguese. But this is what you do. You also have the chance to observe that. Like, who am I when I speak English? And I guess this is also one of the reasons why Kirsty has a program called Find Your Voice in English, right? Because
Discover
that's
your voice in
exactly what it
English.
is.
But
It's
yeah,
a different, yes, discover. So it's a different, almost a slightly different personality, a different part of you, because it will have culturally, for example, things that you don't have in your language. So figuring out all these little things
and it's
going
fun to
inside
get to know
yourself.
them, to get to know
Yes, and
these
then
other parts
watch
of you.
yourself progressing if you're in the early stages, or getting to a plateau. This happens all the time, right? What do you do when you reach a plateau? And it's like I've done it many, many times. And then somehow I have to go back to my roots. I always go back to music, to be honest, and try to go into that route and somehow bring it back to a level that feels good again. Because this is how it is. It's been what, 30, almost 38 years And I still think about it all the time. I still try to make it better all the time. I still practice all the time. And I still know that it's a really, really slow process once you reach a certain level. And you just have to do your best and keep trying. And it's your level of interest and need also that will dictate how much you put in the effort to make it better.
Yeah, there are no there are no quick wins. You have to put the effort in, but it also depends. If you're someone who's a bit reluctant to speak, like why? What is the root of that? Because if the root of it is that you don't feel, for me, I don't feel articulate sometimes. I don't want to make mistakes, but it's more that I can't say all the things I want to say. But with music, it's not about you creating sentences. They're already there for you. So the music is really good for you to get used to listening to yourself, either reading or singing. If you don't like singing, you can read it as well. We've already discussed that. But the point is that you don't have to create anything here. You're reproducing the song in whichever way. And in doing that, you're getting used to listening to yourself speaking or singing those words. Nobody's going to say, well, that's wrong, unless you sing completely different words. But, it's done for you. So you can just focus on the words and the pronunciation and how they fit together.
Yeah, especially if you enjoy the work of that artist, that will make everything better for you, obviously, and you relate somehow to the content. And when I was 10, I didn't relate to some of the content, you can imagine, or none of it. It was a process, but we were in very different stages of our lives because Madonna and I are 19 years apart. So, I mean, of course, but the truth is that there was a good reason for me to endure the pain of talking about grown-up stuff when I was still a teenager. And there were periods that were complicated, I have to say, with erotica songs like that, and periods where she actually came up with less standard material and things like that. So it's also fun to go through all of those stages of an artist and see how you relate to them and what kind of impact that had in your process of learning. So for me, there's all of that to be taken into consideration, and the extent of the vocabulary that you need to learn in order to follow a certain artist's work, not because the words or the lyrics are very poetic, but because it goes into very different realms, and sometimes you have to somehow stretch your mind in order to learn that one other word, right? But then there are a lot more elaborate artists that will give you content that is very deep. And then, of course, the linguistic part of it is just a part. And then there's also the extrapolation, the interpretation, and all of that. So if you get into the groove of the music of an artist, you will also take a lot more advantage of everything that they have to give you from a visual point of view, in my case, for sure, from an artistic point of view, because they will give you a lot of food for thought and the opportunity of giving you the tools, as in the words, the vocabulary, to think about those realities in the foreign language that you're learning, right? So I've been through all of these processes myself of getting the tools that I need to think about certain realities from songs and from artists. So this is almost comes like full circle with time and with age and with your interests shifting. You just evolve, and the music that you listen to somehow evolves too. In my case, it was not necessarily a big evolution, but if you follow an artist whose career is very long and it's basically while you are alive that the person has songs, then you can keep that up too. So it's very interesting, and it's a different process for everyone because everyone has what they like as an artist, as music, the aesthetics. So all of this somehow has to mean something for you. If not, go to YouTube and you have lots and lots of channels dedicated to songs you can use to learn languages, right? Especially in English, but I'm sure they exist in many other languages. So the preference, I would say that the number one thing would be to actually go for an artist that you enjoy yourself and that you connect with. But if it's not possible, there are all sorts of songs that are advised by people who somehow did that work and found reasons why these would be the best songs for you to work with if you're learning a foreign language. And I
Yeah,
guess
make
that's
sure
it.
you trust them. Make sure that, like that there's all kinds of strange stuff on the internet, but some people have gone to a lot of trouble to make worksheets to go with songs, or a bit like what you were doing as a child,
Yeah.
but a lot of them are available for free online, or if you're doing a course, then see if your tutor or teacher or whatever you want to call them will incorporate music into your classes. It can make things a bit different, a bit more interesting, and you can learn information about the culture as well from them. And so, yeah, I hope that that's given you an idea how music can contribute to our learning, that it's something that we can do as a fun activity in our free time to listen to music, but also it can contribute a lot to our understanding of a language and a culture, and can give us a lot of information that we otherwise wouldn't have had. I would also suggest that you listen to our other episodes that we've made together. Episode 222 was one of them. I don't remember the others, but there were more. And check out the Language Worker podcast as well. I will add its link to this, the page for this episode. And do you have anything else you want to add?
Yes, if you're very interested in this topic, Kirsty and I'll say this live, we'll create a workshop for you.
Okay, I didn't know about this.
Of course you didn't, but it's something that we talked about many times. We did a small taste of it some time ago for another reason, but I just think that this is really interesting. At least from a personal point of view, this is something I'm very passionate about. So if you guys would like to explore this avenue with Kirsty, I will be happy to somehow be a part of it. So yes, now I've said it.
Wow, I've just been volunteered. Okay, well then, if anybody would like to know more about that, I guess you need to contact me to let me know, then they can start putting a list together. And yeah, we will follow both of us and we will keep you updated.
Okie dokie. Thank you so much.
Okay.
For having me again.
Thank you.
And for asking me questions about the thing I like talking about the most.
Yeah, I thought that you would enjoy that. And it's good as well. We've got some good tips today. So thank you for that. Have a wonderful day, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed our tips, and let us know if you've got more to add. If you've got any questions, then write them on the post.
We have examples, songs that have helped you, how you studied them, all sorts of things. It would be great to know.
Okay. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.